My name is Alan Rosen. I'm 68 years old. I want to tell you something that took me an embarrassingly long time to admit, and I'm going to tell it the right way. That means starting from the part that doesn't make me look very good at all. I spent the entire year before I retired obsessing over the wrong things entirely. I was looking at the Social Security statements every single week. I acted like the numbers were going to magically change if I stared at them. I was calculating the savings down to the absolute penny. I had the Medicare supplement plans mapped out like a complex military operation. I even had a massive spreadsheet for the property taxes. I tracked the house down here in Florida and the place up north. I thought I was completely ready because the financial numbers worked perfectly. We were fine. We don't think about the grocery bill. But money does not solve the things I'm going to talk about. Here is the uncomfortable truth that I simply did not see coming. You can have all the money in the world and still be completely unprepared. You can be utterly unready for a Monday morning with nowhere to go. I spent 30 years building the business so it would eventually run without me. We moved things. We connected people who needed things with people who had things. You know how that works. Then, about 12 months before the official exit, I realized I had succeeded a little too well. I was still sitting there in the office, but I was already a ghost. My employees didn't really need my sign-off anymore. The deals were moving smoothly without my phone calls. We had no mortgage. We had fixed income. But the actual utility of Alan Rosen was dropping to zero rapidly. I sat in my office. I looked at a beautiful mahogany desk. I realized I was terrified. Not of being poor. I have been broke before. Real broke. So I know the difference. I was terrified of being useless. And the worst part was, I didn't tell a single soul, not even Barbara. I just kept staring at the spreadsheets. I was hoping they would tell me what to do with my life. They didn't. They never do. You wake up and you realize you aren't the guy who makes things happen anymore. You are just a guy in a very nice house. You are eating breakfast at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. And that feels strange. Not good weird, just weird. It is a very specific kind of internal vertigo. For decades, your entire identity is tied tightly to the hustle. It is the constant travel. It is the firm handshakes. It is the complex problems that only you can solve. Then the music stops completely. You are standing there in your kitchen holding a glass of orange juice. You are wondering why the phone isn't ringing off the hook. It is not a tragedy, I know that. I am not looking for any sympathy from anyone. But it is a real crisis of the self. I have seen men who built incredible empires crumble in 6 months. They crumbled because they didn't have a plan for the silence. I almost became one of those men. I am not going to give you a 5-step system. I don't believe in those. I don't give advice. I tell you what happened. I am not your financial advisor. I am just a guy who made a lot of mistakes. I made a few good decisions and lived long enough to tell the difference. I am going to tell you what happened to me. I am going to tell you what Barbara and I figured out. We figured it out while I was drifting through that final year of work. We were sitting on the bare floor of a rented apartment. We couldn't afford a couch yet. I was 31 years old. I was genuinely broke. I had entered a business partnership that went completely south. It took every single dime I had with it. We were borrowing money from friends just to make the rent. The place wasn't even worth it. I had negative numbers in the bank account. I had a wife who had every logical reason to walk right out the door. She could have started over with someone else, but she didn't. Barbara stayed. That mattered. We sat on that floor in the dark. I looked at her and asked, "Now what?" That "now what" was the most useful thought I ever had in my entire life. It forced me to build something real from the ground up. I spent the next 30 years making sure I would never be sitting on that floor again. I worked relentless hours. I chose the deal over the dinner more times than I would like to admit. Barbara will tell you. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I missed things. I thought the goal was the destination. I thought once I reached the right number in the account, the now what would be incredibly easy. But when I finally reached that year before retirement, I was right back on that floor emotionally. Only this time the house was a lot nicer. The bank account was totally full. But the question echoing in my head was exactly the same. I realized something hard. Having the financial means to do absolutely anything is worthless if you have the internal desire to do nothing. I had spent 30 years learning how to build. I hadn't spent a single day learning how to just be. That is a very hard transition to make when you are 67 years old. So I want to go through 6 specific things I noticed during that final year. Things I desperately wish someone had pulled me aside and told me. I was too busy being important to see them clearly, but they were right there all along. I want to share these observations with you now. Hopefully they save you a little bit of the trouble I went through. Let's get into the first thing I realized. Look, the first thing is that you need to fire yourself before the calendar actually does. I stayed in the office way too long. I thought I was overseeing things. Really, I was just hovering around making people nervous. I remember one Tuesday, about 9 months before I officially stepped back from the business. I walked into a meeting about a new distribution contract. This was my absolute bread and butter. I knew these contracts backwards and forwards. I opened my mouth to give a direction I had given 1,000 times before. I saw my lead manager give a tiny, almost invisible look to the person sitting next to him. I had personally mentored him for 10 years. It wasn't disrespectful. It was worse. It was patient. They were waiting for me to finish talking so they could get back to the actual work. I stopped talking mid-sentence. I just let the silence hang there in the conference room. Then I said something vague about trusting their judgment, and I walked out. I drove home that afternoon. I sat in my driveway in the car for an hour. That is when I figured out that I wasn't the engine of the company anymore. I was just the hood ornament. The business had outgrown my daily need to control it. I had built it that way intentionally. It took significantly longer than I ever expected. But I hadn't prepared myself for how much it would sting when it actually worked. I should have spent that entire year slowly removing myself from the daily decisions. Instead, I clutched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. It is always better to leave the room while people still genuinely want to hear what you have to say. Staying around until they are just being polite is a completely different kind of pain. That brief look from my manager cost me a massive amount of personal pride. But looking back, it was the best money I never spent. It forced me to start packing up my desk mentally. Here is the thing about your relationship. Retirement makes absolutely everything louder. Barbara and I have been married for 41 years. I always thought we had a pretty perfect dynamic. We understood each other implicitly. But in that year before I retired, we went out for a $400 dinner. It was at this high-end place we love in Miami. We sat there at the table for 2 solid hours, and I realized with a sinking feeling that we were mostly talking about the business, or we were talking about our adult children. When I deliberately took the business out of the conversation, there was this long, heavy silence. We were just looking at our expensive plates of food. Barbara looked up at me and said, "Alan, you are going to be home a lot more soon. We really need to find something to talk about besides the fluctuating price of shipping containers." She was absolutely right. She is usually right. Barbara has a specific way of saying one simple sentence that takes me an entire week to fully understand. She grew up with less than me and somehow turned out smarter about it. I realized I had been completely gone. I was gone even when I was sitting right across from her for 4 decades. I had outsourced my entire personality to my career. If I could go back in time, I would have spent that final year intensely practicing. I needed to practice being a husband who wasn't also a CEO. We had to relearn how to be a we. We had to do it without the external structure of my daily career holding us together. We don't worry about the grocery bill. But financial security does not solve the profound silence at the dinner table. You cannot buy a shared interest. Trust me, I tried. We had to sit in that uncomfortable quiet. We had to actually figure out who we were to each other when the business phone finally stopped ringing. It wasn't an easy process. It still isn't always easy, but it was entirely necessary for our survival as a couple. I also had to face the uncomfortable fact that I don't fully understand why I felt so much intense guilt about relaxing. My father was an immigrant. He came over to this country with nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. He didn't talk about it much. You could see it clearly in how he treated a single-dollar bill. He treated it like it had taken immense effort to get there, because it had. He worked hard until the day he died. He didn't have a retirement phase. He had a life of constant labor that he was deeply proud of. My father used to say that a man who keeps his word is worth far more than a man who has money. I heard this every Friday night at Shabbat dinner without fail. I think I spent that whole year before retirement feeling deeply like I was breaking my word to him. I felt bad voluntarily stopping my work. I started obsessing over incredibly small things to compensate for this guilt. I spent 3 full days arguing with a local contractor. It was over a $12 discrepancy on a minor terrace repair at the house. Not because the $12 mattered to my budget. I have spent way more than that on a bad cup of coffee at the airport. I did it because I desperately needed a deal to win. I needed to feel like I was still sharp and in command. It was completely embarrassing behavior. I was pacing around the yard like a caged animal looking for a fight. Barbara finally came out. She told me flatly to stop bothering the poor working man. I was looking for a business to run in my own backyard. I was absolutely terrified of having a quiet mind. I wish I had spent that year acknowledging something important. My father's incredible work ethic was a vital gift for his time. It was not a mandatory life sentence for mine. He built a strong foundation specifically so I could eventually rest. And I was stubbornly refusing to sit down on the chair he built for me. Then there is the complex family dynamic. My daughter Rachel lives nearby with the grandkids, Eli and Maya. In that year before the major transition, I kept trying to consult on her life. I didn't know what else to do with my excess energy. I would go over to her house. I would start giving her completely unsolicited advice on her husband Mark's commercial real estate deals. I was trying very hard to be the wise patriarch. I simply didn't know how to just be a normal grandfather. I remember Eli asking me if I wanted to play a new video game with him. He is 10 years old now. He is named partly after my late father. He was so excited to show me how the controls worked. I told him I didn't have time right then because I had an important call to take. I didn't actually have a call. I just didn't know how to sit still for 20 minutes without a clear business purpose. I felt foolish holding a plastic controller in my hands, so I actively chose to look busy instead. Maya, who argues with everyone, told me I was being boring. I had no idea where she gets that from, but she was right. I missed a lot of those small, vital moments that year. I was so incredibly busy preparing for the big, monumental moment of retirement. I should have been practicing the art of playing a game I didn't understand with a 10-year-old boy. My son Daniel works out west in the tech industry. He told me once on the phone that I was optimizing for the wrong metrics entirely. He tries to explain his software job to me, and I just nod along. But that specific phrase stuck in my head. I didn't fully know what it meant at the time. I do now. I was trying to win at retirement instead of actually living it. You cannot put a clear return on investment on an hour spent laughing with your grandson. That is a completely different kind of currency that I had to learn how to accept. There is one more thing I noticed about legacy. I spent my whole career building a name. I thought my legacy was the business. In that final year, I started looking closely at my kids. My son Daniel out west, my daughter Rachel here. I wondered what they actually thought I stood for. I realized they didn't care about the distribution contracts. They didn't care about the quarterly profit margins. They cared about the times I showed up. They cared about the times I didn't. I spent that entire last year organizing trust funds and complicated estate plans. I wanted the money to be completely perfect. But I wasn't organizing my actual legacy. I wasn't asking them what they needed from me as a father now. I assumed the money was the only answer. It wasn't. Legacy isn't what you leave in the bank. It is what you leave in people. I had to learn that the hard way. I am still learning it today. It takes a lot of time to undo 30 years of putting the deal first. You can't just flip a switch when you retire. The damage or the distance is already there. You have to actively repair it. That takes a different kind of work entirely. Lastly, you have to realize that some days are just going to be incredibly small, and that is perfectly okay. I was on a flight toward the end of that final year. A long flight, maybe 6 hours across the country. Fully paid for, comfortable leather seat, going somewhere warm and sunny. I usually spend those flights on the phone right up until takeoff. Or I am furiously working on complex contracts on the small tray table. But the business was fully set up. It truly didn't need me anymore. I sat there in that seat for 6 hours. I didn't know what to do with myself. That had never happened to me, not once in 30 years of working. There was no big deal waiting on the other end. There was no one desperately needing a vital decision from me. I felt like I was physically crawling out of my own skin. I tried to do a crossword puzzle in the airline magazine. I ended up getting intensely frustrated. I couldn't optimize the speed of completing it. I was literally timing myself. It was ridiculous. I looked at the guy sitting across the aisle. He was just staring out the window. He was looking perfectly content to watch the clouds roll by for hours. I envied him more than I have ever envied a guy with a bigger private jet. I envied him more than someone with a vastly better investment portfolio. That was the exact moment I fully realized something. The hardest transition isn't the financial one at all. It is the identity one. I had spent my entire adult life being a person who actively does things. I had absolutely no idea how to be a person who just simply is. I told Barbara about it when I finally landed. She looked at me and said, "Welcome to what I've been doing while you were gone all these years." I think about that sentence a lot. I really wish I had spent that year taking more long flights to absolutely nowhere. I needed to just get used to my own company. I was constantly running from the silence. The silence was exactly what I needed to face. I am not going to sit here and tell you it all worked out perfectly the day I signed the final exit papers. It didn't. Some days I still wake up early. I automatically reach for a phone that isn't ringing with a massive crisis. Some days I sit in the study and wonder if I stepped back a few years too soon. But mostly it is okay. It is a very different kind of life. It is one I am still actively learning how to lead. I think a lot of people are in the exact same spot or getting very close to it. And nobody is being honest about the fact that it is completely okay to be a little lost. It is okay even when you are officially considered successful. That is the real truth. If any of this sounds like where you are right now, I would really like to hear from you. Leave a comment down below. But please don't tell me about your 401k balance or the value of your house. Tell me this instead. What is the one specific thing you are doing right now to prepare for the day after the money finally stops being the main goal? How are you actively preparing for the person you are going to be when the business simply doesn't need you anymore? Barbara and I read those comments together. I find them significantly more useful than you would probably think. Hearing how other people navigate this silence helps immensely. And if you want to hear more of this kind of talk, the real version of things, not the glossy brochure version, stick around. Subscribe to the channel. That is exactly what we do here. All right, take care of yourselves.